Brexit is a big deal that will affect a lot of people. However, other experts believe that Brexit may actually benefit the UK economy. Is that true? Follow along to discover more about Brexit and how it will affect the UK. First, the UK considered the original decision to quit the EU when analyzing the situation. Imports become more expensive as a result of the British pound's roughly 10% decline against the UK's trade partners. It also increases the competitiveness of your exports. However, the UK exports remained the same in this instance. Despite the fact that they didn't change at all, the cost of imports increased, which caused an increase in inflation of between 2% and 3%. People were impoverished as a result. Because there hadn't been any complete panic in the markets, the Brexit side believed they had won the fight for many years. Kwasi Kwarteng seriously alarmed the markets with his latest mini-budget. Sterling utterly crashed before making a little recovery. But more important was what occurred to government borrowing costs, since the financial markets believed that the budget was essentially reckless. You may recall that the UK have had enough of experts. The economic measures that have been implemented after the Brexit vote were really brought together in the mini-budget. The argument that Brexit affects the UK's performance was flatly rejected by Brexit supporters. Remainers, or those who oppose Brexit, want to blame it for everything. The truth is invariably in the middle. But it would be absurd to claim that Brexit has no bearing on how the UK is performing. Naturally, it is. When comparing the performance of Britain to that of other advanced economies, the UK are beginning to see a very fascinating trend. All of the other G7 nations had a trade rebound after the pandemic, whereas Britain's recovery has mostly been flat. As a result, the UK's trade intensity decreased. The decline in trade ties between smaller UK enterprises and their international counterparts is another factor that may be measured. And that's significant because it provides information on trade patterns, as well as how smaller businesses in the UK used to develop by progressively growing their clientele and selling goods into the European single market, which is no longer the case. The LSE found that in the first 6 months following the Trade and Cooperation Agreement's entry into effect, the number of relationships between the UK and the EU decreased by almost a third. According to a calculation by the Resolution Foundation, each person's salary will suffer a long-term loss of £470. The bureaucracy has risen since Brexit. To understand it, many small businesses have had great difficulty. All other G7 nations have seen an increase in corporate investment since 2016, but not the UK. You can see that corporate investment in the UK had an increasing trend for a very long period, but that trend has plateaued since 2016, specifically after the Brexit vote. Additionally, the government has been working to fix this. It has been lavishly showering it with cash. The introduction of the super deduction, which offers substantial deductions for capital and innovation investments, hasn't truly changed the situation. I'm very concerned about the state of our economy going forward because in the end, investment is what generates capital and ensures that economies can continue to expand. And other individuals claim that while Brexit certainly isn't the sole issue, something is definitely wrong. The fact that the UK has a more service-oriented economy than others might have a little impact. But the UK and France also have significant service sector economies. Despite being a large manufacturing economy, Germany is not significantly more industrialized than the UK, and company investment has been substantially higher in every other nation. This is the outcome of Brexit. The UK economy's path is unknown to the public. Eventually, company investment won't increase as quickly. The UK observed negative consequences of Brexit in all sectors, including pricing, investment, and trade, which we can now identify as a Brexit effect rather than a pandemic effect or an energy crisis effect. These implications of Brexit are extremely obvious. Clearly, the COVID pandemic has had a significant impact on the British economy. Likewise, the consequences of the Ukraine war on the supply chain, notably on the cost of energy. It would be absurd to assert that Brexit is the only factor contributing to the British economy's woes, but you can make a comparison between the UK and other nations instead. In terms of the predicted rate of economic growth, the UK is very well at the bottom of the standings, especially in 2023. Therefore, there is virtually no growth in the UK, and only sanctioned Russia was worse than the United Kingdom. You can investigate the disparity between the performance of other economies and that of the UK, which has suffered specifically from Brexit. The UK administration would contend that this is due to the pandemic's bungee jump effect, in which Britain fell, recovered more rapidly, and now things are returning to normal. According to the Office for Budget Responsibility, Brexit will ultimately result in a 4% decline in the UK's economy. The economy loses roughly £100 billion annually, which translates to about £40 billion in lost tax income. Because the UK is not experiencing the economic growth that it normally would, they are poor. The Brexiteer concept of a Brexit dividend frequently centers on the premise that the UK can run a more agile economy. It's possible to deregulate. The challenge is that when you deregulate, a new regulatory framework is created. The chemical sector invested £500 million over a 10-year period on registering its chemicals with the European Union, gaining access to the British market, as well as markets in 27 other nations. All of those compounds must now be re-registered for a separate UK register, which will cost the government an estimated £2 billion. So in essence, all they've done is asked business to do is spend billions of pounds copying a system that already existed in the EU. They are creating their own, because they want to be independent and unique. Yet, that is only a cost. Anyone who claims that deregulation would be good for business is beyond my comprehension. From the perspective of their industry, it only results in additional expenses, red tape, and labor for no gain at all. Before moving forward, what are your thoughts on Brexit? Comment below with your thoughts and let us know. Now, let's return to the video. A hiring problem has affected the EU. Areas include construction, hospitality, social services, and agriculture. The debate about how much of that is due to Brexit, how many people left as a result of Brexit, or how much of it was due to COVID may go until your face turns blue. Some might say that this is better since we've cut off the supply of low-cost labor from the European Union that was previously allowed to enter the UK under free movement. In order to make up for this, businesses are eventually expected to invest more in machinery and other productivity-boosting measures. But there has undoubtedly been some short-term disruption as a result. And it was troublesome then, as it is now, for the government to claim that all of this was part of their strategy to create a high-skilled, high-wage economy. Thus, the economy will change as a result of the loss of free mobility. Because those businesses were founded on the premise that there would be unrestricted migration, such as hospitality, construction, and soft fruit farming, this causes a difficult period of transition. But ultimately, that's a political decision. A soft fruit industry is not required. We had one as a result of unrestricted mobility. We now need to determine if we want one moving ahead. EU-UK ties have been poisoned by the protracted dispute over Northern Ireland, which resulted in the building of a border in the Irish Sea to prevent the reintroduction of a north-south border on the island of Ireland. The EU is using them as a negotiation chip and claiming that the United Kingdom cannot join the €95 billion Horizon Science Research Project, which is crucial to British scientists and universities. But since the British government is attempting to unilaterally renege on its duties in Northern Ireland, it has been rejected. I believe it will be very challenging to see an improvement in the UK trading ties as long as that mindset persists. One of the issues that plagued the Brexit discussions was the debate of Northern Ireland and its future commercial relationship. Everyone anticipated there would be an issue, yet we went forward with the transaction. In their vote, Brexit won. Over the past few years, Lord David Frost, a former Brexit minister who negotiated the Northern Ireland Protocol, and Boris Johnson have been trashing one another. Since the European Court of Justice has decided that Northern Ireland should continue to be a part of the EU's single market for goods, it seems a little surprising to me that they applied EU laws to Northern Ireland. I will only say one positive thing about the Northern Protocol. It has given Northern Ireland a fantastic commercial position in Europe. It is the only region on the entire continent of Europe that has both a foot in the UK single market and a foot in the EU single market. For Brexit supporters, the economic success story and prosperity in Northern Ireland, at least in terms of inbound investment, is an unwanted truth. Its inclusion in the European Union's single market for goods is one of the factors contributing to its success. The commercial situation with the European Union is precisely the same as it was for the entire UK up until a few years ago. Around Brexit and its consequences, there is a political conspiracy of silence. It affects the entire government, particularly the Labour Party. Separating the effects of COVID and those of Brexit is quite difficult. The Bank of England's governor is reluctant to discuss it. This entire topic has taken on a kind of taboo status. We must have an open discussion about how Brexit will affect the economy. Once there was an administration from any party that was ready to examine the facts, people may start claiming that Brexit seemed to have harmed the UK. You are becoming impoverished as a result of it. This is what our data indicates. By the way, that is what the evidence will show. And after repeatedly reiterating that to the public, you can start kicking off the discussion. Politically speaking, it is true that neither side can be truthful about Brexit. The Conservative Party is reluctant to acknowledge that the real option presented by Brexit is between abiding by the rules, like Norway, and self-injury, which entails all the economic suffering that results from cutting oneself off from your nearest and largest market. The Labour Party also doesn't want to bring up Brexit because it brings up the reasons why people voted for the Tories. As the Conservatives see it, the Labour Party attempted to prevent Brexit. British politics are still debating this issue. People don't want to approach Brexit in any way. The nation is split over it. Communities are split. It has split apart families. But in a way that prevents the UK from having the discussion they need to have about how to make Brexit work without harming the economy. Those who oppose Brexit are frequently referred to as re-maniacs or remoaners. They are all being asked to embrace something that, as of 2015, was exclusively the UK Independence Party's declared stance. Britain would be better off remaining in the European Union, according to the Conservative Party, Labour Party, Liberal Democrats, Greens, trade unions, the CBI, and the whole British political and civil society. Yet everyone of the UK is being told that they must show their devotion. New national policy is this. Brexit will benefit certain companies. Companies that can manufacture goods for the UK market that are now too complex or challenging to import from the EU. This does not imply that the UK economy is doing well, though. The UK should be free to set its own regulations in the City of London, according to theory. This is the area in which we excel and are most knowledgeable. While they were part of the EU, they were in charge of creating a lot of rules. They haven't yet seen the effects of it today. The doomsday prophecies to the City of London were usually exaggerated. Large institutions, in particular, invested work early on in the process to Brexit-proof their operations, so they could continue to function lawfully regardless of the result. Since then, businesses and people have slowly moved to other locations where it makes more sense for them to be, in what I believe is a gradual drift. Brexit cast doubt on the city's status as Europe's prime location for conducting financial transactions. Some of the younger voters who oppose Brexit will be the losers. There is a vote among the elder members of the population, according to the age distribution of those who supported leaving the EU. The next generation will start talking about this subject. They are no longer able to travel readily. If they wish to work in Europe, they require a nomad visa. They are no longer able to invest readily in Europe. Additionally, being a member of a larger organization would be great given the delicate geopolitical scenario. Conservatives frequently assert that they will face severe difficulties if they are unable to demonstrate the benefits of Brexit by the time of the next election. As a result, you have the Minister of Brexit Opportunities creating employment. Brexit will always have advantages, and they are never far away. Given that this is a Brexiteer administration, and that this event occurred 6 years ago, someone in the government should have determined what the benefits are by now. The Brexit supporters haven't really developed a compelling argument for why cutting off the UK from its greatest market right on its doorstep will improve the economy. What was the first thing the government published in its paper on Brexit opportunities? That your pint pot in the English bar would soon have a crown mark. The Leave campaign painted a fairly upbeat picture of the future of the British economy, including a big wave of deregulation, Britain's global trade treaties, and a buccaneering lifestyle. There have been some trade agreements, although they have often involved nations with which Britain already had a trade agreement through the European Union. The only significant exception to it is Australia. With the ups and downs of the UK economy, signing a free trade deal with New Zealand or Australia is probably only very little benefit. The frictionless commerce you had with your greatest trading partner, who is located just 20 miles away over the water, and the loss of a free trade agreement is far worse though. By virtue of Brexit, the UK lose 4% of its GDP. According to the government's own estimation, the trade agreement with Australia benefits them by 0.8%. To yet, every attempt to describe in detail what a Brexit dividend would entail, whether it be in terms of trade agreements, regulations, or deregulatory measures, has been completely ineffective. The best-case scenario for a Brexit dividend is that it consists of several little adjustments that together make a significant difference. There isn't currently any type of brilliant concept available. Project Fear has been misrepresented in every way up to this point, as they have heard time and time again. A punishment budget was promised to them, but it was never delivered. By choosing to leave, they were guaranteed an increase in unemployment of 800,000 people. But that did not occur. Remainers did themselves no favors by predicting that the British economy would collapse into recession, and that millions of people would lose their jobs as soon as a Brexit vote was successful. That hasn't happened and probably never will, to be honest. The Leave campaign's use of the Project Fear tag was incredibly successful, and it still exists today. I believe that the problem with Brexit is that it is tedious, complicated, and wonky. It was challenging to discuss this technical information like trading agreements, customs unions, and paperwork in a political campaign. The Brexit strategy they chose to adopt was the most detrimental economically. There has always been a trade-off between our capacity to control things like regulation and the economic consequences. The European Union is a commercial and regulatory powerhouse, not a superpower in the same sense as the United States. It is the greatest market in the world as a whole, and all of its regulations have been harmonized to promote more open commerce. Additionally, it made many other nations and economic blocs adopt EU regulations for actions and policies that they disagree with, as well as results in their own economy. The UK can no longer hold the makers of European regulations responsible. I think we can conclude: 1. Brexit was a deliberate attempt to undermine the economy. 2. Because the UK is eventually a poorer nation as a whole, some of the poorest individuals will also be the losers. This is particularly damaging to the weaker folks. 3rd, the UK cannot conduct referendums on the basis of very basic economic slogans, and it is risky to attempt to weaponize economics, in my opinion. The slow puncture of Brexit. It is not an automobile accident. Therefore, Brexit does not necessarily result in a crisis of unemployment in the UK, but it may mean that over time, UK employees end up in less productive positions, which causes the economy to shrink more than it otherwise would have. Pay is thus less than it otherwise would have been. The creeping puncture comparison has been accurate since 2016, but the mini-budget, in my opinion, is the first indication that if they push things too far, not only will you start to hear much more of an audible hiss, but you may even have a blowout. The economics was only one aspect of Brexit. It was about restricting people's freedom of movement. It was about giving the UK economy a sense of autonomy. The issue was that the proponents of Brexit and those who pushed it were dishonest about the trade-offs and expenses involved, which really exceeded the advantages economically. It is acceptable to talk of regaining power and national sovereignty. You may have argued that point, but you must acknowledge that there would be some financial consequences. The issue was that Boris Johnson notoriously followed the have your cake and eat it philosophy. The notion that you could keep all the access to the EU single market you desired and still be free to go on what you would call your buccaneering Brexit is known as cakeism or cherry-picking, as Michael Barnier liked to put it. The process of negotiating with the EU caused the cakeism to gradually but inevitably burst. Actually, they are still paying for it, since no one has ever been willing to acknowledge or recognize the trade-offs before beginning to discuss solutions. That's it for today. I'm hoping we can teach you anything. If you enjoy watching videos like this, please click the like, subscribe, and bell buttons so that you will be notified when we post new and intriguing content.